There's this uncomfortable space between wanting something and waiting for it to arrive. We live in a world that tells us to push, to chase, to speak up, to make it happen. We're taught that silence means we're not doing enough, that if we don't fight for what we want, it will slip through our fingers. But what if I told you that silence, real, intentional silence, is not the absence of effort, but the presence of trust? I learned this the hard way. I used to think that if I wasn't speaking, if I wasn't explaining, defending, proving, or chasing, then I was somehow failing. Silence made me uneasy. It felt like giving up control. But here's the truth. Silence isn't a lack of control. It's understanding that not everything needs to be controlled in the first place. When we stop talking, when we stop forcing things, something beautiful happens. We start hearing. We hear the things we ignored because we were too busy filling the space. We hear our own intuition, the people around us, and most importantly, we hear life whispering back to us. We live in a world that equates noise with power. We've been conditioned to believe that the louder we are, the more influence we have, that speaking up constantly, urgently, without pause, is the only way to be seen, to be valued, to matter. But silence is often mistaken for weakness, for uncertainty, for a lack of control. The truth is, silence is one of the greatest strengths we can cultivate. It is not the absence of power, but the presence of restraint, wisdom, and deep understanding. It takes courage to be silent in a room full of voices. It takes confidence to hold back when every impulse tells you to react. It takes an incredible amount of self-awareness to know when to speak and when to stay still. Silence gives us something that noise never can: clarity. When we're constantly talking, constantly defending, constantly reacting, we don't leave room to think, to process, or to truly understand what's happening around us. We get caught up in the momentum of conversations, in the pressure to respond quickly, in the need to prove ourselves. But when we embrace silence, we step back from that chaos. We create space to observe, to reflect, and to make choices based on wisdom rather than impulse. Think about the most powerful moments in life. The moment you hold your breath before making a life-changing decision. The pause in a conversation when someone is truly listening to you. The stillness before a storm, before a breakthrough, before a moment of profound realization. These are the moments when silence speaks louder than words ever could. Silence is also a tool for resilience. In difficult situations, it allows us to process emotions before reacting. It protects us from saying things in anger that we can't take back. It helps us navigate conflict with grace rather than defensiveness. It teaches us that not everything needs a response, not every argument needs to be won, and not every situation requires our immediate input. And perhaps most importantly, silence connects us to ourselves. When we remove the noise, the opinions of others, the constant chatter, the endless demands, we are left with our own thoughts, our own intuition, our own truth. In silence, we learn who we really are, not who the world expects us to be. We live in a fast-paced world where instant reactions are expected. Someone asks a question and we're supposed to have an answer immediately. Someone challenges us and we feel the need to defend ourselves right away. Someone says something we disagree with and we jump in to argue before they even finish their sentence. But here's the truth. Reacting is easy. It's automatic, often emotional, and sometimes impulsive. Listening, on the other hand, is an art. It requires patience, presence, and a willingness to set aside our own need to be right, to be heard, or to be in control. The difference between listening and hearing: most people don't truly listen. They hear words, but instead of absorbing them, they're already formulating their response. They're waiting for a pause, not to understand, but to jump in. When we listen this way, we miss out on so much, on what's really being said, on the emotions behind the words, and on the opportunity to connect deeply with others. True listening isn't just about processing words, it's about understanding intent, emotion, and meaning. It's about being present, about giving someone the space to express themselves without interruption, without judgment, and without the pressure of immediate resolution. Why we react instead of listen. We react instead of listen because it feels safer. Reacting gives us a sense of control. If we defend ourselves quickly, we don't have to sit in discomfort. If we argue back, we don't have to question our own beliefs. If we fill the silence with words, we don't have to feel vulnerable. But reacting out of fear, frustration, or insecurity rarely leads to resolution. It escalates situations. It creates misunderstandings. It turns conversations into battles rather than bridges. The power of pausing. One of the greatest habits we can cultivate is the ability to pause before we respond. Just a few seconds of silence can change everything. It allows us to absorb what's being said. It gives us a moment to process our emotions. Understood, to know that our words matter. When someone listens to us, really listens, we feel valued, we feel respected. And when we extend that same gift to others, we build trust, deepen our relationships, and create spaces where open and honest communication can thrive. Listening over reacting in everyday life, this isn't just about conversations, it's about how we approach life. When we listen rather than react, we start to notice things we previously overlooked. We see the subtle cues in people's body language. We pick up on the emotions beneath the words. We become more in tune with our surroundings, our relationships, and even ourselves. We live in a world that glorifies movement, productivity, and busyness. From the moment we wake up, we are bombarded with messages telling us that we need to do more, achieve more, and always be in motion. We check our phones before we even get out of bed. We fill every spare moment with noise, scrolling through social media, replying to messages, thinking about the next thing on our to-do list. But in all this movement, all this doing, we rarely stop to ask ourselves an important question. Am I actually moving in the right direction? Stillness is not something we're taught to value. In fact, it often makes us uncomfortable. We associate stillness with laziness, with stagnation, with being unproductive. But in reality, stillness is the very thing that brings clarity. It is in the moments of quiet, of non-doing, that we gain the deepest insights into ourselves and our lives. The difference between noise and wisdom. When we are constantly in motion, physically, mentally, or emotionally, we don't give ourselves the space to think clearly. Our minds become cluttered with external influences, societal expectations, and the never-ending pressure to keep up. We confuse noise with wisdom, busyness with progress. Think about a glass of muddy water. When you shake it, the water stays cloudy. But when you set it down and allow it to be still, the dirt settles and the water becomes clear. Our minds work the same way. If we are always in motion, our thoughts remain scattered, unclear, and chaotic. But when we allow ourselves to be still, even for a little while, our thoughts begin to settle. We begin to see things as they really are, rather than through the lens of stress, anxiety, or urgency. Why we avoid stillness. For many of us, stillness is scary. When we finally stop moving, we are left alone with our thoughts. We are forced to confront our emotions, our doubts, and the deeper questions we have been avoiding. We realize that some of the things we've been chasing might not actually be what we want. We recognize that we've been filling our time with distractions rather than purpose. But facing those realizations is where true clarity begins. Stillness forces us to check in with ourselves. It helps us see what is real, what is important, and what is merely noise. The power of pausing. Imagine this. You're driving in thick fog, trying to reach your destination. The more you speed up, the harder it becomes to see. The faster you go, the more likely you are to make a wrong turn or miss an important sign. But if you pull over and wait for the fog to lift, suddenly the road becomes clear. You can see exactly where you need to go. Life is the same way. When we rush through it without pausing, we often make choices that are not aligned with who we truly are. We make decisions based on stress, on pressure, on what seems like the right thing in the moment. But when we give ourselves the gift of stillness, whether it's a moment of silence in the morning, a long walk without distractions, or simply taking time to breathe, we allow the fog to lift. We start to see our path with more clarity. Stillness in everyday life. Stillness doesn't mean we stop doing things altogether. It simply means we create intentional moments of pause. Moments where we allow ourselves to be present without rushing to the next thing. Instead of reaching for your phone first thing in the morning, take a few moments to sit in silence. Instead of filling every gap in your day with distractions, allow yourself to just be. Instead of reacting immediately in a heated conversation, take a breath and let the stillness guide your response. Instead of forcing a decision, sit with it for a while. Let the answer come to you naturally. Emotional resilience is often associated with strength, endurance, and the ability to navigate life's difficulties without breaking down. We hear phrases like stay strong, push through, or don't let them see you sweat. But what if resilience isn't about reacting forcefully or pushing harder? What if real resilience comes from silence? The ability to sit with our emotions, process them, and choose our responses wisely. In a world that demands instant reaction, silence is often misunderstood. Many see it as avoidance, weakness, or a lack of confidence, but silence, when used with intention, is one of the most powerful tools for building emotional resilience. It gives us space to regulate our emotions, understand our triggers, and develop a deeper sense of control over our reactions. Silence as a buffer between emotion and reaction. Have you ever said something in anger that you later regretted? Or reacted impulsively in a way that made a situation worse? This happens when we don't allow silence to play its role as a buffer. When we experience strong emotions, anger, sadness, frustration, or even excitement, our natural instinct is to react immediately. But in those moments, we're often not thinking clearly. Our emotions take the lead and we say or do things that may not align with our values, our goals, or even reality. Silence, however, slows everything down. It creates a pause between what we feel and how we respond. This pause allows us to process what's happening, understand our emotions, and decide on the best course of action. Instead of reacting in the heat of the moment, we can respond with clarity and wisdom. Learning to sit with discomfort, one of the hardest things about emotional resilience is learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of escaping them. Most people try to avoid emotional pain by distracting themselves, turning to social media, binge watching TV, staying excessively busy, or even using unhealthy coping mechanisms. But avoiding emotions doesn't make them disappear. It only buries them temporarily. Silence forces us to confront what we feel. When we sit in silence, we have no choice but to listen to our thoughts, our fears, our frustrations. And while this can be uncomfortable at first, it is also incredibly healing. When we stop running from our emotions and instead allow ourselves to experience them fully, we develop resilience. We learn that emotions are not enemies to be avoided, but messages to be understood. This is where true growth happens. In the silence, we learn what our emotions are telling us. Maybe our frustration is pointing us toward a boundary that needs to be set. Maybe our sadness is revealing something unresolved from the past. Maybe our anger is highlighting a deeper fear. Silence gives us the opportunity to decode these messages and grow from them. Silence as a tool for managing conflict is one of the greatest tests of emotional resilience. When we're hurt, offended, or criticized, the natural urge is to defend ourselves immediately. We want to explain, justify, or argue our point. But how often does an immediate reaction lead to resolution? More often than not, it escalates the situation. Silence, however, allows us to approach conflict with wisdom rather than emotion. When we take a moment of silence before responding, we give ourselves time to cool down, preventing words spoken in anger. We allow the other person to fully express themselves, which can diffuse tension. We gain clarity on whether a response is even necessary. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Silence can communicate more than words. It can show restraint, wisdom, and strength. It can prevent unnecessary arguments and keep us from being pulled into drama that doesn't serve us. The power of silent reflection. Beyond conflict, silence helps us reflect on our own growth. When we practice silence, we create space to evaluate our lives, our choices, and our emotional patterns. Instead of reacting to life on autopilot, we become intentional about how we move forward. Ask yourself, how do I usually react to stress or criticism? Am I responding in ways that align with who I want to be? What emotions am I avoiding that I need to face? These are the kinds of questions that silence invites us to explore, and with each moment of self-reflection, we build a stronger foundation of emotional resilience. Embracing silence in everyday life, so how can we use silence to build emotional resilience in our daily lives? Practice the pause. The next time you feel triggered, take a deep breath and count to 5 before responding. Notice how this small moment of silence shifts your reaction. Create space for stillness. Set aside a few minutes each day to sit in silence. No phone, no music, no distractions, just you and your thoughts. This strengthens your ability to be present with your emotions. Use silence as a conflict strategy. When conversations get heated, resist the urge to react immediately. Instead, take a moment of silence. This often leads to better communication and fewer regrets. Journal in silence. Writing down your thoughts in a quiet space allows you to process emotions without external influence. It helps bring clarity to situations that feel overwhelming. Observe before speaking. In group settings, practice listening more than talking. Notice how much more you understand when you're not focused on responding. We live in a world that moves in patterns. If you pay close attention, you'll see it everywhere. The changing of seasons, the rise and fall of the tides, the beating of your heart, the inhale and exhale of your breath. Life itself is a rhythm, a dance between movement and stillness, expansion and contraction, beginnings and endings. But in today's world, we often resist this natural rhythm. We push ourselves to be constantly productive, constantly achieving, constantly moving forward without pause. We fear slowing down, believing it means we're falling behind. We resist endings because they feel like failures, not realizing they are simply part of a greater cycle. Yet when we align ourselves with the natural rhythm of life, we experience something powerful: flow. Things begin to unfold in their own time without force. Opportunities come not from chasing, but from being in tune with the right timing. And instead of feeling exhausted from fighting the current, we learn to move with it. The cycles of life, expansion and contraction. Everything in the universe moves in cycles. Day turns into night, winter turns into spring, and even the stars are born, expand, and eventually fade. Our own lives mirror this same rhythm. There are times of rapid growth and momentum, and there are times of rest and renewal. Yet we often struggle with the natural ebb and flow of life. We welcome seasons of expansion, success, excitement, new beginnings, but resist seasons of contraction where things slow down, where we're called to rest, reflect, or let go. But both are necessary. Just as the moon disappears before it becomes full again, we also need moments of stillness before we can move forward with clarity. When we embrace the rhythm of life rather than resist it, we find balance. Think about the way the ocean moves. The tide comes in and then it goes out. Imagine how exhausting it would be if the tide tried to force itself to always be high. It would be unnatural, unsustainable, yet we often expect ourselves to always be in a state of high energy, productivity, and progress. The universe doesn't work that way, and neither do we. Trusting divine timing. Have you ever noticed that when you force something, whether it's a relationship, a career move, or a personal goal, it feels heavy, like pushing a boulder uphill? But when you trust the right timing, things seem to fall into place effortlessly. This is the rhythm of the universe at work. Things come into our lives when we are ready for them, not when we demand them. The flower does not bloom because we yell at it to grow. It blooms when it is nourished, when it has received the right amount of sun and rain. When we stop fighting the timing of life, we find peace. We learn to trust that when things aren't happening as quickly as we want, it doesn't mean they never will. It simply means we are in a different phase of the cycle, perhaps one of preparation, learning, or even healing. We often see delays as obstacles, but sometimes they are redirections. What if the thing you are waiting for hasn't arrived yet because something even better is meant for you? What if the pause you are experiencing is a gift, giving you time to develop the strength and wisdom needed for what's ahead? Trusting the rhythm of the universe means letting go of control. It means surrendering to the process, knowing that just as the sun rises every morning, life has its own perfect unfolding. Listening to your own natural rhythm beyond the external rhythms of life, we each have our own internal rhythm, a way of being that feels natural, aligned, and true to who we are. But how often do we actually listen to it? We live in a culture that tells us we should all move at the same pace. Hustle culture glorifies nonstop productivity, making us feel guilty when we need rest. Social media bombards us with timelines, when we should be married, when we should own a house, when we should be successful. But real success isn't about following an artificial timeline. It's about moving in harmony with your own unique rhythm. Some people thrive in fast-paced environments, while others need more space and stillness to create. Some people find their purpose early in life, while others take longer to grow into it. Neither is right or wrong, it's just different timing. When we ignore our natural rhythm, we experience burnout, frustration, and resistance. But when we honor it, life feels smoother, more aligned, and deeply fulfilling. Take a moment to ask yourself, am I forcing something that isn't meant to happen right now? Am I resisting rest when my body and mind need it? Am I moving at my own pace, or am I trying to keep up with others? The more we listen to ourselves, the more we align with the natural rhythm of the universe. The art of letting go, one of the hardest lessons in life, is learning to let go of control, of expectations, of things that are no longer meant for us. But letting go is not loss. It is a necessary part of the rhythm of life. Think about trees in autumn. They don't resist the falling leaves. They let them go because they trust that new growth will come in spring. If the tree clung to dead leaves out of fear, it would never make space for fresh ones to grow. In the same way, we must learn to release what no longer serves us. When something leaves your life, a job, a relationship, an opportunity, it might feel like an ending, but endings are just beginnings in disguise. The rhythm of life requires us to shed the old to make way for the new. What if, instead of fearing change, we embraced it? What if we trusted that every closed door is leading us to something better, aligning with the universe's flow? So how do we align with the natural rhythm of life instead of resisting it? Practice patience. Trust that everything is unfolding in its perfect time. Stop forcing things to happen before they're meant to. Honor rest as much as action. Understand that stillness is just as important as movement. Rest is not a weakness. It is a necessary part of growth. Let go of control. Release the need to micromanage every outcome. When you trust the flow of life, things often turn out better than you imagined. Listen to your intuition. Pay attention to your own internal rhythm. Move at the pace that feels right for you, not what society expects. Embrace change. Every phase of life has its purpose. The more we accept change instead of resisting it, the more at peace we become. In a world that constantly demands our attention, where conversations happen in rapid-fire texts and opinions are broadcasted before they are even fully formed, silence can feel unnatural, even uncomfortable. We are encouraged to speak up, to be seen, to have a stance on everything. But in all this noise and all this talking, how often do we truly hear ourselves? Silence is often misunderstood. Many equate it with weakness, passivity, or a lack of confidence, but in reality, silence is one of the most powerful tools we have. It is a gateway to our deepest truths. It is in silence that we strip away the expectations of the world, quiet the external influences, and reconnect with who we truly are. If we want to live authentically, to make choices that align with our values, to build relationships that are real, to express ourselves in a way that feels true, we must first learn to be silent. Because in silence, we discover what is truly ours and what is merely an echo of others. The noise that drowns our authenticity. From the moment we wake up, we are surrounded by noise, literal and metaphorical. The constant hum of notifications, the expectations placed upon us by family, society, and culture, the pressure to fit into a mold, to say the right thing, to act a certain way. We grow up learning how to please, how to adapt, how to survive in environments that often reward conformity over individuality. Slowly, without realizing it, we start to filter ourselves. We say what we think will be accepted. We suppress thoughts and desires that don't fit the norm. We shape our identities based on external validation rather than internal truth. And after years of this, we wake up one day feeling disconnected from ourselves. We wonder, who am I really? What do I truly believe? What do I actually want? The answers to these questions don't come from more talking, more doing, or more distractions. They come from silence. Silence as a path to self-discovery. When we embrace silence, we give ourselves space to reflect, to listen, to simply be. It is in these quiet moments that we can ask ourselves the hard questions.